So welcome to another Startup Centre Victoria chat, a meetup, business to business, sharing knowledge. And I'm very excited to have our special guest today, Megan Williams, all the way from Kyabram. And I'll tell you a little bit more about Megan and Camel Milk Company Australia in a moment, or she will, to be more specific. But I'd just like to start off by acknowledging the land that we are meeting on today. And I believe that you're Yorta, Megan. We're today in Dja Dja Wurrung country, and I know some of our listeners come from Taungurung country. So we're very appreciative that we are living in such beautiful country and would like to acknowledge the traditional owners. So today's meetup is very much about your startup journey, Megan. And I know it's not just yours, your husband, Chris, who will be out working as he is. And you formed a company, Camel Milk Co. Australia. You're just outside Kyabram.
Yes.
You know more than I do. So, but let's just start by setting the scene. What does your business look like today? Describe it to us. What do you actually sell?
Yeah. So where we are today, we're on 480 acres of sort of prime irrigatable dairy land. We have just over 500 camels. Around 375 of them are breeders. We're milking around 100 camels currently, producing roughly about 5 litres per camel per day. And we currently have fresh milk in 1 litre bottles that we send around Australia and some parts overseas. And we also have a freeze-dried camel milk powder that we also send around, as well as quite a comprehensive skincare range, sort of hand creams, body wash, body butters, balms, that sort of thing. So we sort of farming, factory, and sales and marketing, and that's us in a very, very quick nutshell.
It is. But for those that have no conception of what camel milk, your business is about, that is a great starting point. But let's wind back to the start, because a lot of the people that tune into these talks, it's very much about how did you do it and what can they learn from that process.
Absolutely.
So what I have to ask the question, why camels?
My very simple answer is, why not camels? So I think at the very beginning, so my husband Chris and I had been dairy farming with my parents, and we'd also spent a little bit of time up in the Northern Territory on a cattle station. And we'd moved back to Victoria and we were dairy farming. We'd started our young family, and I recall the night we were watching TV and there was this documentary about camels, and it was all about camel milk in other countries and how nutritionally different it was and the said health benefits that it had. And I was just mesmerised by this. I know when I lived up in the Northern Territory, I was quite amazed by camels anyway. And so from that night, we put a lot of effort into researching camels, camel milk, the markets around Victoria mostly, and then more into Australia. And when we first started, we didn't start off with a really big mindset. We just started off with quite a small, if we could just sort of sell fresh camel milk around our region and potentially Melbourne, what does that look like? And that's where we sort of started off.
So what made you think that camel milk was a winner though?
Well,
testing, or you just taking that leap of faith?
Yeah, a bit of both. I think we were ready for a bit of a challenge, knowing that there wasn't a huge, so what we discovered with our market research was there was no market for camel milk in Australia, but there was plenty overseas. And so what we did in researching that, we looked at, can we, farm camels? Can we get milk from a camel? What equipment do we need, and then what's our price point and how are we going to logistically get it to our customers, and why would people drink camel milk? And so coming off the back of them, that was the main thing that drew us to it. At the time, our eldest was lactose intolerant, and we were feeding this lactose-free milk that for him, he didn't like the taste of. So when we'd heard that camel milk was fabulous with all these anecdotal health benefits, we thought, well, off the back of that, that's another reason for people that can't drink traditional dairy or goat's milk, they could be looking into drinking camel milk.
Very good reason. And we often say entrepreneurs are problem solvers. So you're doing a little bit of problem solving at the same time.
Yeah.
So you mentioned a lot of things that you had to look into to get started. What was the biggest challenge and how did you overcome it?
I think the very first steps was a factory going to buy the milk from us and process it and sell it, or did we have to do that ourselves? The other one was making sure that we could farm camels. What licensing did we need, as they were back then and not long before that being considered an exotic pet? But now they're more mainstream, so you didn't need a license to farm camels. And more that, did we need council approval to, start up a camel dairy if we were going to do our own factory, which we were quite lucky where we live in the Kyabram area and district. It's a great community, and I was born and bred in Kyabram. And Chris is actually from Wales, so we met up in the Northern Territory. But he's been here many moons, so almost a local. So basically, we were really lucky with being able to reach out to other factories or people that probably had the knowledge or had the answers to the questions that I was asking. So more about, okay, so I've got to set up my own factory. Can I do a factory tour of your factory and, pick at them and ask all the questions about food safety and processing milk and equipment and whatnot. So pretty quick, I learned that I had to become a food safety supervisor and that we would have to set up a small micro factory on site. And being from a dairy background, Chris and myself had no idea what was involved in setting up a factory. So it was really jumping into the unknown, sourcing a pasteurizer and how to use the pasteurizer and writing a food safety program and what testing on the milk needed to be done. I think for Chris and I, our biggest strength was knowing that we could farm. I don't think that was ever a shadow of a doubt for us. We knew that we could farm. Camels are somewhat different to cows, but that side of things with cropping and animal health and welfare, that was our really strong point. Factory soon turned from not knowing a great deal into doing a food safety supervisor's course, getting a food safety program written, sourcing. We actually started everything quite semi-permanent because it was, I guess, such an unknown industry. We didn't want to put all our eggs in one basket as a way of speaking. So we'd actually started off on 104 acres, about 10 minutes from where we are now, still just out the other side of Kyabram. And we just started off with 3 camels, and that was more like a pilot dairy, seeing if we could milk camels, could we farm them? And we got a really small processing room. It was just a 3x9 metre that met all the Dairy Food Safe Victoria requirements. And from there, we started trying to milk camels, which probably proved to be a little bit harder than we imagined. It's not quite like milking cows. You can go out and buy a dairy cow, but buying a dairy camel that's not heard of, especially back in 2014 when we first started. That was completely unheard of. And realistically, if people did speak with me and heard we were going to milk camels, they laughed at the beginning, honestly. It was quite humorous, apparently. We started, it was a portable building. We bought a small pasteurizer. We started off with a tiny little 30-litre batch pasteurizer. And since then, we've grown from 3 camels we got to about 12 or 13 camels, 25 camels, 50 camels. Once we got over 100 camels, so we got a larger pasteurizer. We got a 150-litre batch pasteurizer. Our market had begun to grow around Melbourne and Sydney, and we'd pretty much outgrown the farm that we were on, and we were looking at what was our next best option.
So that's a great page. But basically, you've trialed it and grown slowly. That's been your approach.
Absolutely.
How did you tap into the markets? Was that a difficulty for you?
The direct answer, I would say, is yes, because Chris and I have no background in marketing, and honestly, we didn't have those connections with people in that area, so we really didn't know where to turn to. So that was probably, I remember our accountant, who actually was our brother at the time, he said to me, Megan, I know that you can do this. I know that you will get milk from a camel and get it into a bottle, and that labeling and designing a bottle, that's a whole nother story within itself. He said, but how are you going to get to your market? So I realized that sales was probably at that point now our weakest point, and we really needed to either engage with people that knew what they were doing or turn that into our strongest point somehow. So we set about launching a website. That sort of seemed like the forefront, back in 2014, websites and social media. I know social media has taken a whole new turn over the past 8 years, but back then that was you had your business page so that people could get hold of you. People had to be able to search you, and nowadays people like it at the click of a button. So we started up with a website, built a website with our product, and pretty quickly the local news got wind of what we were doing, and we were on our local Win News. And from that, weeknights got hold of us, and we featured on that, and that started to bring in the demand naturally from the people that had watched those. And so I say that we're very lucky to have the media jump on something so unique, which helped boost, it's basically free advertising. People wanted to hear about this quite unique thing, and we were really lucky, because I think that's what really gave us the boost forward that we need. And because we were started so small, we had a waiting list at the beginning, like we couldn't keep up with the demand. And then from there, the National 9 News actually got wind of us, and they came out. And I remember we hadn't been in front of a microphone or a TV or any, a camera. So, they're up in your face with this big camera, and it was quite daunting. I remember I was so nervous. I was shaking in my boots. And they must have done, I reckon they did about 4 hours of filming and repeats. And I remember when it came over the National 9 News, it went for a whole of 35 seconds. And I thought, all that filming all day for this short segment. But that just, I had friends ringing me up from all over Australia ringing and saying, I saw you on the news, Megan. And that just set the business booming. It went from strength to strength. We had shops then call us. So rather than having to go around and be like a rep and basically walk in the door and say, hey, this is who we are, this is what we do, they soon came to us. So we cast a bit of a web, and we're catching our customers and stores in that sort of respect. So really, really lucky, considering Chris and I had no real background.
Yeah, well, so that was your opportunity and you took it. You had
Absolutely.
a unique product and that publicity.
Yeah.
But even in terms of building websites and doing that sort of stuff, did you just learn it yourself, or did you actually buy in support?
I would have liked to have just learnt it myself, but that was really not my forte, and still isn't. I do people engagements and farming well, and that's where my strengths are. So basically, for me, I sought after somebody locally to do our website, which ended up turning to be an ex-Kyabram person, and he now does a lot of big and wonderful things in Melbourne, and he's been with us from the get-go. I called him in 2014, and he helps us revamp and redesign and everything like that for our website. I did a lot of our social media myself, and since had someone do that for us. But at the beginning, that wasn't something I was very knowledgeable about. So definitely was seeking someone that knew a lot more about that.
And you do have a big social media following, because I can remember 2018 when I was getting ready for this book, of which you are on the cover. You probably can't see it very well, but here you are with the camels on the front cover. And I did a little short video and tongue in cheek, I'm saying, well, why would you want to milk a camel, and how would you do it anyway? And it was a very short video, and I got over 10,000 hits on that. And I thought, wow, you must have a really big following, because I don't have that big a following.
Yeah.
So well done you.
It is interesting. Like, I think people are interested. It's intriguing. How do you milk a camel? Yeah. And then what do you do with the camel milk, and or why is a camel milk skincare? So why would I buy that? Like, so people are intrigued with all these questions, so they tend to dig in more. And on our social media, people love a good cute photo of a newborn baby camel and things like that. So yeah, it's been really good on back of these media releases and whatnot. We've been able to get a larger following on social media. Facebook and Instagram are our main two platforms that we use, and keeping them up to date and relevant, and I suppose and human. Like, another thing that I've learned really quickly over the 8 years, I say I've had no background in marketing, but after 8 years and a lot of dedication, that's something that sort of has just fallen upon me, and I've come to learn quite a lot. But probably lost where I was going there, but
That's
but
okay.
yeah, I've learned a lot and learned to grow the social media following. And people don't like being sold to often. They like to be just to indirectly learning about the product, and then that's up to them to decide whether it's for them or their family and things like that. So not directly selling to people. I think they really appreciate that.
Well, I want to talk about the extended skincare products in the meantime, but it just jumped into my head. I remember a conversation, you actually had a name change from what you originally registered as and to where you ended up now. What was the issue there? What made you make that change, and was it difficult?
It wasn't really difficult to make the name change. So we started off with Camel Milk Victoria, and that was, as I said earlier, we didn't have a huge scope for thinking much bigger than our region and our state. And so when we first started, we thought that was quite fitting. And we learned pretty quickly that Australia was more of our business, and we were getting inquiries from overseas, and we'd become export registered by 2018, and we were soon sending product overseas. And I guess when you look at different countries, you definitely don't know their states or provinces, but you know the name of the country. So it became quite evident. And I had people ringing up asking for Victoria because we were Camel Milk Victoria. And, it's like calling it Camel Milk Megan. They're going, could I please speak to Victoria? And I'm going, there's no Victoria here. That's the name of our company. So we realised pretty quickly by late 16, early 17, we had gone through the motions of discussing the change of the name, and through social media platforms, that's as simple as changing the name. For our website, we did build a whole new website and then had to drive traffic to it. And that itself, being on top of Google, you need to be able to drive traffic to your website to have that up the top. So when someone Googles Camel Milk, I would hope that we're the top one that folds in. So there's a lot of work that goes in the background. And half of which I'm not even going to pretend to understand. Tim, our website designer, does a fabulous job. Yeah. So changing the name was more for national and international recognition, because people don't know, Victoria, New South Wales, Queensland as states as such when you get into, around the world. So Australia was more fitting for us. And our branding, from where we had like a little sort of logo of the Victoria with a camel head, our branding went to a bit more of something that was on trend. I probably don't know, you probably can't really see it in this, but we've got the gold, like the black, we do black, white and gold as a bit of our logo. So we would also, we'd had our 12-18 months getting into the market, learning what customers want, what's appealing to the eye, because whether we like it or not, we're people and we decide with our eyes first. We look across a shelf and then that pops out to us, and then we might go over and pick it up and read it. So we needed something that was attractive. And so that's where, a rebrand, rename was needed. And that's how we continued to grow. And
it's doable. But I guess if you had your time over again, you would have thought, let's think big right from the beginning. But
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it was hard to think big right from the beginning because camels were unheard of. Milking a camel was just, it was laughed at, but 8 years on, absolutely, there's definitely a market. We're certainly, we've got a lot more going on than we did when we first began.
So in terms of finance, when we talk to businesses, finance to many is a barrier. How did you manage did you need to get outside investment? How did you manage your growth?
Yeah, so that's a really interesting one for us. When we first started on our farm, because we already had our farm before we turned it into camels, we'd been rearing young dairy heifers that we were milking in my family's dairy herd. And so we had a good couple of hundred there. And so what we did for the stepping stones, obviously we had a little bit of capital ourselves to, get that processing room and the first few camels, and just to, testing the waters, so to speak. And then as we could see the market in camel milk, we started selling off our dairy herd and bringing in a camel herd. So it was sort of getting rid of one and to support the other. It was probably about 12 months in that we went, this is working. This is a business. This is going to support myself and Chris. And we sought to, get a loan to keep growing, which was getting the bigger pasteurizer. And at the time when we would applying for a business loan, we'd all but signed on the dotted line. We'd worked with the banking manager, and she was fabulous. And then she sent it all up to, I think, head office in Sydney, and they said, well, Camels that's not a business. And so they came back and said, well, camels are a pet, not something that can be milked. And I remember the feeling of that day was, I was so upset because what we were doing was so different and so unique. And at the time, banks advertised that, are you an entrepreneur? Are you doing this? And I thought, this is great. They can support us. And they didn't. And that shocked me. And I remember Chris and I going, one day we will turn around and go, we got all the way here without a bank, that because they wouldn't support us at that tiny little startup. And so for us, and that's all it was, because camels were considered a pet. And I'm sure now if we went for a loan, they wouldn't consider camels as pets, because we've had to break the ice on the industry. So anyone probably looking into camels, that would be something that is not considered a pet anymore. It's considered,
once you're successful, it's very easy to get credit. Yeah, the irony of it all. That
so that was really interesting, and that was quite gut wrenching for us. So I mean, we had other means and ways, thankfully, but what would have been such a straightforward potentially bank loan. But anyway, that's the way, they're the hurdles that some businesses face. And because we were doing something so left field and so unheard of, it probably seemed like a huge gamble to the bank, and fair enough.
Yeah. So when you introduced your skincare products, at what point did you decide that was a good move, and did that present new problems, challenges for you?
Yeah, a bit of both. So I remember when we first started, how it all came about was this lady contacted me and she said, I want to buy some milk off you, Megan. I'm going to make some handmade soap. And I was like, oh, it's interesting. And really, I was that person, and I say this often, I was that person that bought the 4-pack from, the local supermarket for $2.99. I thought I was getting a red hot deal, not thinking about what I was putting on my body. And so this lady said, I'm a soaper. And I said, oh, that sounds so intriguing. I'd love for you to send me a bar. Anyway, so she bought the camel milk soap, and made the camel milk soap and gave me some. And I'd used it, and it was the most soothing thing I'd ever used. And I thought, this is fabulous. And I started to look into, why would people want, a camel milk soap? And I'd heard a lot about a goat's milk soap as well. And people were using goat's milk soap for all their, skin conditions and whatnot. So, that's when we basically went, well, can you make us a batch of soaps, and we'll see if we can sell them. And we just couldn't keep it in stock. And from there we went, I think a skincare seems to be fitting. And we went from that to making a moisturizer and a hand cream. And again, I knew nothing about skincare. So I basically again reached out to those that I knew about that. So I kept, every time I found a challenge that I didn't know a lot about, I tried to reach out to those that I could, pick the bones through it and find out what I needed to know. So I've been really, over the years, that's something that I've always done, is always sought after the person that could help me become more educated at that.
And business people are very generous, with people that are starting up, and and that's great. How would you approach it? You wouldn't, would they conceive it as being competitive? Would you choose? How do you go about choosing the right person to ask for help?
Yeah, I am a bit careful about people perceiving us as competitors. I know when I first, all those years ago, looked back in the milk factory, we being so small and camel milk that didn't have an industry at all, I was happy to go with them because they didn't see us as a competitor. Whereas if I was another cow factory, a dairy factory, then I would have been. So I always made sure that they were in line with what we were doing, but not exactly the same. So I didn't potentially go to another brand of like a goat soap or anything like that when we were looking at skincare. What I actually did is there was a manufacturer up in Sydney, and we're up there for a trade show, and I'd called ahead, and what they did contract manufacturing, so they would get the gig in the end. I went up there, I called her, I said, I know nothing about skincare, I know nothing about packaging, I know nothing about sizing or labeling. And so I went in and I sat in this office that had wall to wall of just soaps and moisturizers and packaging and different sizes and different ingredients. And I said, I don't know what I want, but I know what I don't want. And I said, so I was pretty sure I knew what I didn't want. I didn't want, if I saw something, I can go, okay, I can identify that I don't like that. So she soon brought in this new, dark packaging, and all the sizing just looked fabulous. So what we originally bought out was pump bottles, pump moisturizers, and pump body washes, and the dark labeling the black and white went with our branding that we already had, and it was important to stay in line with that. And I said, I'd done a bit of research myself and knew that there was already a really saturated skincare market, and went, well, what is the point of difference with camel milk? So being certified toxic free was a big one for us, making sure that we were ticking all those boxes, and being really good for all skin conditions. So having no nasties in the product as well. And then when it come time to bringing out a fragrance, I'd say to them, what do you find are the most popular fragrances, and what ones are coming up and emerging and trending? And then I'd go home with a whole lot of samples, and anyone and everybody, because we were doing tourism at our farm, so anyone that came to the gate, I'd say, try this one, have a smell, give them a number from 1 to 10. And that's how I literally, males and females, young and old, we talk to our potential customers about what they like the most. And so with our skincare range now, we now do tubes, because having a pump hand moisturizer, it's not travel friendly. You can't pop that in your suitcase when you're heading up on your holiday, or in your handbag, or in your nappy bag. So that's where we again did a bit of a revamp, and changed again with our customers after a couple of years. Once it's always important, I think, to stay up with market trends and not to get stagnant and lost where you currently are. Keep moving forward.
It is possible to keep changing and evolving.
Yeah.
Good message.
Absolutely.
Now, you just mentioned tourism then. Please explain.
So when we first moved to our 480 acres where we are now, when we moved, we were faced with quite a drought, really. And for those that don't quite understand water and water policy around here, it's we'd be here all day if I tried to explain it. But quickly, in a nutshell, there's water that's attached to land, and you need to flood irrigate the property. And so what people would say, oh, camels don't need a lot of water, and that's true. To live, they don't need a lot of water, but we need to feed our camels, so we need to grow cropping, we need to grow crops and whatnot. So we needed to be able to irrigate our land so that our camels weren't having dust baths every day. And so with that, we would buy water, and like this time of year, we could buy water for $60 for a megaliter of water. But back in 2017, there was cracks in the ground that you'd lose your car keys in. We sent a tape measure down up to 8 meters, and it was dry and dusty, and water was up to $700 and $800 a megaliter. So from $60 to $700, I think we paid $730 a megaliter. And that, and to put it into perspective, to irrigate our farm and grow the crops that we need and the food for our camels, we usually need around 200 megaliters. So if you do the maths, 200 times 700 is it quite, I could have bought a house for the cost that inflation of water at that time. And so camel milk already has a high price tag due to the cost of production, so we couldn't put our milk up any higher. So we opened up to tourism. It wouldn't have been until, I don't think it was until late 2017 or early 2018 that we opened up to tourism. And that involved just doing tours. So we set the farm shop up a little bit more with our skincare, and people would come in and understand how camels became to be in Australia. So we talked a bit about the early pioneers. We talked about camels, how they helped founded the outback, how we became camel farmers, and where we started to where we are now. We did a bit of a walk through the dairy and viewed the factory. And
whoops, sorry. Sorry, Megan, I think you're accidentally muted.
Unmuting myself now. Can you hear me?
Yeah,
that's okay. I saw it come up. I'm trying to talk and this thing comes along and says I'm muted. I'm obviously rambling. Is that your way of telling me?
No, that's okay. We can pull this all in. And so you've got these tours coming to your farm. You would have a little disruption though, wouldn't you?
Yes. So anyway, we were showing them how we milk the camels, and they got to taste some camel milk. Oh, now my phone's ringing. We got to taste some, excuse me, 2 seconds. There we go. Sorry about that.
Perfectly all right. Busy office.
Yeah, so we were running tours. People were just coming in, having a taste of the milk, trying on some of the skincare, learning about what the difference is, hand feeding a camel, and off on their merry way they'd go. Occasionally we do, afternoon tea and things like that, which entailed camel milk scones with jam and cream. So people could come and have that experience. Say, you wouldn't believe what I ate today, a scone that was camel milk, and I tasted camel milk. And then that in itself is another indirect way of advertising as well, so getting our name out there. So say we had a tour of 30 people, a couple of those people were always part of another group, whether it's a men's shed group or they worked at a nursing home that wanted to bring we've had all sorts come through, the Red Hatter ladies, country music festivals that are on locally, they'd bring busloads out. We've even had the Canadian farmers, Dairy Farmers Association come and have lunch here. So from that, there's always someone, and it was just a rippling, snowballing effect of having that. But we did close to tourism at the beginning of 2020 when COVID hit. Obviously, there were so many restrictions. And so when we closed the gates to tourism, it was a bit of a blessing in disguise, really a bittersweet moment. Obviously, we didn't have that tourism coming in, but we had a bit more freedom because we live and work all in the same place. So a bit more privacy, and I was able to get about my daily activities a bit better as well, trying to not to have to juggle a tour and then someone randomly driving in and wanting to see a camel. So while in some respect I do miss doing our tourism, it's also quite nice not to do it as well.
So how long have you been in operation as a camel farm? How many years?
Coming up 8 years this November.
Okay. So what is proving to be your biggest revenue driver? Where do you realise you have to spend your most attention?
It's still in our fresh milk. Our fresh milk is our biggest revenue driver, followed closely by our freeze-dried powder. And the reason I believe that is because where people can't find our fresh camel milk, they're turning to the freeze-dried, the next best thing, because it doesn't need to be refrigerated. So the logistics and the supply chain for powder is much simpler than the fresh milk. So fresh milk is probably still our biggest, I'll say headache. It's not a headache, but it's our biggest. It's labor intensive, bottling all the milk, and you've got time frames, and the factory side of things is quite heavy, testing the milk, testing the air, testing the water, and making sure we're following a really strict food safety program. Compliance. Whereas the powder and the skincare are a little bit more straightforward and a little bit simplistic, I guess you could say, but still our fresh milk is our biggest revenue stream.
Well, basically you've diversified, which is always wise to do.
Absolutely.
Now, you answered that without hesitation when I said, what is your bigger revenue? How do you keep track of your accounts and things like that?
Yeah, so I'm not the best on accounts. I never have been. We use a system called QuickBooks. So my brother, who's our accountant, he set us up on that. And I remember the first few years I'm fine with writing the invoices. My parents said to me many years ago, there's always two sides to a business, Megan. There's the running of the business, and then there's the bookkeeping. And without the bookkeeping, you have no money coming in. So you've got to make sure you do them both really, really well. And so I remember that sticking with me. So in the early days, I worked really closely with our accountant, I could invoice, and I could sort of, if people paid the right amount, I could code them off correctly and things like that. But as our business grew, I wasn't able to put in, invoices that we had ourselves into our system, and I was getting behind and I was getting mixed up, and I'm like, I really was. I thought, I've paid that one. And then they'd ring up and say, Megan, you haven't paid last month. Something, righto. And I'd get in. And so I was trying to do too many things. So it would have been in 2018, I think I sought out to hire a person that could help do our bookkeeping for us, because I was getting so behind. It's not something I wanted to do. And I was able to find someone that could come in and help. They're a bit multi-skilled, being in a small business too. I couldn't just say, right, you're going to be a bookkeeper 4 hours a week and you're going to be my factory assistant 3 hours a week. So I was able to find someone that could multitask and come in and learn a bit of the factory. Obviously, I oversaw the lot of it, but they would come in and do a little bit of the factory, be able to answer the phone and do some office and admin. But more importantly, do my books, put in the invoices that were coming in, or make sure the invoices that we were sending out were being paid and coded. And then he'd come to me and go, look, Megan, these guys haven't paid for a little while. And I can just, do that real friendly. Hi guys, you haven't paid or anything like that. That's the other side to business that is always quite difficult for a lot of people is money. People seem to think it's dirty or don't like to talk about it, and I've learned pretty quickly. At the start, I was much similar. But now money's inevitable. Money puts food in our mouths, clothes on our back, roof over our head. And without it, we can't run a business. And without invoicing people, we don't get the money in. So then we can't pay the money out. Vicious circle or a wonderful circle, depending on what way you want to look at it. So for me, I've always, and it depends what customers we work with. I've certainly noticed since COVID, some of our really good paying customers have struggled. And in turn, that makes it a bit of a vicious circle as well. So it's just having that, giving a call, going, how's it going? Even if we can trickle the funds in. So that side of the business, it's all wonderful to hear how we start up and what challenges we've had. But without money, no business goes ahead.
Wise words indeed. Exporting. How big a headache was that for you?
It was much bigger than we anticipated, I think. When we first started, we weren't licensed with Dairy Food Safety Victoria, and we were governed under our local council, knowing that we would, once the bill passed in Canberra, that we would then come under the umbrella of Dairy Food Safe. So we were being audited by a third party, and we wanted to start sending our fresh milk to Singapore. And basically what had happened was to export, you need an establishment number if you're a food. And so because we weren't under the Dairy Food Safe Victoria umbrella, we needed to go straight over that to the Department of Agriculture. So I remember when the auditor first came, we thought we were pretty dinky-die with our food safety program and everything that we had. And so we had this auditor come, and he did a 2-day audit over our factory, and just simple things with our taps on our hand wash basin, because you can't just have a sink to wash all your utensils. You also need to have a hand wash basin, and that's just common practice throughout food standards. And so that's what we did. But to be export accredited, we needed to have a non-touch tap. So we had to get just things like putting knee valves in, which is very common practice nowadays anyway in a lot of foods and hospitals and whatnot, and with a bin, having a lid that you don't have to touch to put something in, and logging our milk as we're pasteurizing, logging it every 30 seconds to know what the milk's doing at any given time. And so when it came time to export, we really needed to just tighten up the belt really with our food safety to get it over the line to be exported. And even then, the supply chain. So we'd been sending, we started sending, we got our establishment number, we've become export approved. It takes a lot of time and money and effort to become export accredited. And then once we were sending our milk into Singapore, we've got some business partners over there, and they rang me one day and said, Megan, like our milk has a 21-day shelf life, and they're saying it's going off before its use by date. And I thought, this is huge. This is a huge problem, because if people are drinking our milk and it's off, what's making it go off? Could they become sick from it? And also, that's our brand. And once a brand name is tarnished, there's no getting it back. So I'm really protective of our brand, because that's something that we've built up. And simple things like bad reviews or having milk go expiring or tasting off before its expiry date is really concerning. And so, you know, the first thing we do is we keep retained samples. So I went into our cool room, had a taste, and by all accounts, our milk that we'd retained back tasted fine. But you can't just stop there going, well, our milk's fine. You don't know what's wrong with yours. And we do regular testing. So we know we don't have E. coli or Listeria or Salmonella. So I couldn't quite work out why their milk was going off. And this was happening sort of every week. Get to day sort of 17, 18. And so what we did is we sent these tiny little disc loggers. They were tiny little round things, and we put it in the box, and we let our receiver know. So in Singapore, we were sending to a company called Fishwives, and they have a lot of, you know, that boutique Australian foods that they sell over there. And I said, we're going to send a data logger in with the milk, because other than the break in the supply chain, we can't work out why this is happening. And we said, as soon as you get it, pop it in a bag, don't touch it, and send it straight back to us. So it took a couple of weeks for it to come back to us, but we were able to log it into our computers. And what we could see was the freight forwarder. So we would send our milk on a truck to Melbourne to a freight forwarder, and then they would put it on an aeroplane and send it to Singapore. And what was happening is our milk, when it left here with our fridge company, it would stay below 5 degrees. But once it got to the docks in Melbourne, it was going up to as high as 14 degrees. And any refrigerated product, and that has to be below 5 degrees. Or if it does spike above, there's a certain time frame in all food safety. So it was not allowed to be more than 5 degrees for any greater than 3 hours. And it was evident for 2 days, it was well above 5 degrees. So I was surprised it was even lasting as long as it did. So I quickly then called Fishwives, let them know of the issue that has been happening, and that we need to get this sorted straight away, because in the end, you might be able to go buy in some more Camel milk from somewhere else, but that's our brand that's taking the hit for someone else's incompetence. So very quickly, I had quite a stern conversation with the freight forwarder as to why our milk wasn't staying below 5 degrees, and that problem got resolved quite quickly. And that's another thing that I'm very, with any distributor or anyone on selling our product or even selling our product, I'm quite strict with not tarnishing our brand, because that's all we have, you know. And so I'm always, you know, not making any ridiculous health claims or not doing anything that would, you know, potentially throw us in the mud. And so over the years, we have at different times had interesting inquiries come in saying, oh, my milk's off, and we've got to take that seriously and get to the bottom of it.
So I'm taking out of this the importance of having a trusted person in another country, because it's well out of your hands then. Getting the right people to deal with is important. How did you go about, you know, establishing who are the right people to deal with?
That's a really good question, because there is no simple answer. I don't think we've never certainly always got it right. We've certainly worked with people that have been very shortly dealt with. We thought, yeah, this could work, and it hasn't been good business. So over the years, we've worked with people that have been great for business and people that haven't been so great. I remember when we first started with the factory that we looked through, and the fella said, I'd asked him about, you know, distributors and contracts and contacting people. And he said, Megan, if you go into a contract with someone and have to revert back to it, then the business is already not working. He goes, if you can, it's not worth the money. It's not worth the paper that it's written on if you've got to revert back to contracts. He goes, if you can sit down with this person, have a cup of coffee or dinner, or get to know their family, and they seem like good people to you, and you can do business with them, then that will be the best business. And I think they were wise words that I heard all those years ago, and I may not have known it at the time, but looking back over the years, I can look back and go, he's so right. The people that I've been able to be really frank with, have that great conversation and connect with, I've done fabulous business with those sorts of people, whether it's within Australia or overseas. The people that and I know we have lots of supply agreements or contracts or short-term contracts. It's a safe thing to have. It's good. It gets it all out on the table. As I talk, people seem to think money's dirty, but getting it all out on the table is fabulous. But if we've ever got to revert back to it, it's never been great business. And there has been a time or two where we've had to revert back to contracts, and it's never been, you know, pleasant. So I think that finding the right people is a bit like anything really, in anything you do. It can be hit and miss. We go to trade shows and we have a lot of people come up and they've got a shop or they're a distributor or they want our products, and they're not always a great fit. We try, we see how it goes, but I've always found the people that I personally can connect with and get on well with. And so myself and Chris have always found that has been the best business. If it doesn't feel right, it's not going to be right. Yeah.
Well, I've been listening to everything you've been saying and how much information that is in your head. I also know that you have a family. How many children have you got?
We've got 3 young boys.
3 young boys.
They're
yes.
7, 8 and 9 at the moment.
Yes. And obviously a lot younger when you were starting your business off. How did you balance? What's your tip to someone with a young family starting off in business? How have you managed it?
I don't know. No, our last, he was born in our first year of starting up this company. So they were very young. We had a newborn, a 1 and a 2-year-old when we started this. So I started down the road of having an au pair. And that was great for what it was. They would live in or live out or whatever we could get. And sometimes it was hard even managing that extra person to manage the kids, because I was trying to get them into daycare, but daycare hours didn't suit Camel milking hours, and we lived out of town. So we always had a bit of an up and down there. I've been really lucky. I live locally where my family are. So I do have a fabulous network around me. Being, as I said at the start, community and having that network of family has been, I think, paramount for us. But yeah, we went down the road of au pairs, but they wanted their 88 farm days, and no sooner did they arrive, I needed to start looking for the next one. So I found that a huge challenge, and it was quite anxious, really. How am I going to pasteurize this milk if I've got no one to look after the kids? And there's always that mother burden that am I just leaving my kids for someone else to raise? I had that mother or parent guilt that, are we working too much and not giving the best for our kids? And that's I think a lot of working mums struggle with that. I feel so many people going, I have this whole parent guilt because I'm here busting my bum trying to get this business going, or working these hours, and the kids are suffering because of it. So I realized that I wanted to have my kids at home in those early years when they weren't at kinder or school, so that when every minute I got, I could go home and they were home. Whereas if I had them at daycare, I would go home and they're not there. So I ended up finding a nanny, a local lady, and she was a mature age lady, which suited us because she'd had her children. So I wasn't going to have someone young. Is also great, but I knew that I would have her probably more permanent and long term, as opposed to someone that was younger, that was having their own children and would eventually leave. So I was really looking for stability. So I had her for 3 years in the end, and that saw me through the 2 older boys getting into school, and my last one, Carter, getting into kinder. And she would work 8 in the morning till 6 o'clock at night, 4 days a week, and she was fabulous. She would help with the house. She was me when I couldn't be there. She would help around the house and help getting dinner ready and doing the washing and all of that. And I also had a young girl from the age of 15, and she would come in on weekends if I needed her to, just for that shorter periods to help look after the kids. And I think honestly that's how we managed when the kids were younger. And now the kids are older. There is that whole, I'm on this call now, and I've said to the kids, I'm on a really important phone call. You can't come into the office, and I've locked the office door, knowing that Chris is out there working somewhere. But it's school holidays, so they're out. I heard them before kicking the football, and I'm thinking, oh gosh, if that lands on the roof. But now we sort of juggle it between us and manage it. And as I said, family is what we turn to more now. Like I will have my mum, my sister, or my sister-in-laws be able to, and my brothers, like they're fabulous. I think networking and using the people around us.
Well, I think from everything we've heard today, we've benefited from you trialing it and adapting and coming to this conclusion. So you've just shared a wealth of information. What if someone came up to you and said, I'm thinking about starting a business, what would be your best piece of advice to them?
I don't know how simple I could answer that, to be honest. It would depend. I do have I've had a lot of people over the years come to me about they wanting to start up their own brand of milk mostly, or want to start their own camel farm, or, do a carbon neutral milk or something like that. And I often, when it's related more to my business, I'd be very real with them with our challenges. And branding and marketing the product is our biggest hurdle. And thinking that you can sell this much when realistically you only sell this much, and or you're thinking you're going to get this price, but then there's obviously distribution price and wholesale price. So I would say do your absolute research, and that is by talking like what these people are doing. They're coming and talking to me, and what I did, I went and spoke with other people. So do your research, half the profit margin, double the budget, and just talk to people and try and work out if they're really giving you their real deal. Sometimes when I spoke with people, I was like, don't quite feel that was as authentic as I thought it could be. And I'm not asking people to lay their whole life out on the line for me either, but I think listening to other people and hearing their journeys can help a lot.
Well, thank you so much. We're not going to close the meeting, but I'm going to just thank you now and finish the recording. Please stay on for a moment, everyone, and we'll open up to questions.